It has been a little over a week since Anita Anand was sworn in as defense minister, and already she's making changes, announcing today that military sexual misconduct cases will be moved to the civilian justice system.
We're not sitting around waiting for anything to occur. The teams are in active discussions right now. This is all hands on deck.
It's a move that follows the interim recommendations from former Supreme Court Justice Louise Arbour. Recommendations Arbour laid out in her letter last month to the former Minister of Defense. So what does this tell us, if anything, about how Minister Anand is approaching her new role? It's Thursday, and I'm here with that issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Rush. Good to see everybody. Chantal, I'll start with you. How should we interpret what the minister did today? Does it tell us anything about how she might be approaching this role differently than her predecessor?
I guess up to a point. She basically decided to implement today a recommendation that has been sitting on the Minister of Defense's desk for 6 years, and which by now had become totally inevitable. But, good points for getting a second opinion that says the same thing 6 years later and following up on it.
It is, Andrew, too, still an interim recommendation. So the idea is we'll put it in place, we'll do it, and we'll either leave it or we'll figure out something else. So I'm not sure whether there's any room once you've started something to dial it back.
No, not on this file. I think that train has left the station. This is what's going to happen. I think it's interesting that you have a new minister here who clearly has a legal background that may be part of this, but who's also a new minister, and I suspect the powers that be, i.e. the Prime Minister's office, would prefer that this was brought in with a new broom rather than having it done by the old minister who was a dead man walking for some time. It's clearly this was needed when you had so many senior officers in the military who not only participated in this kind of sexualized culture, to use that phrase from the Marie Deschamps report, but more importantly, I think felt themselves to be invincible. And probably with good reason, it seems. So clearly, normal reforms, normal tinkering was not going to fix this. You had to take a much more sweeping approach to it. I think the other thing that this calls to mind is that, the chain of command didn't just stop at the top of the military. It extends to the defense minister, who then reports to the prime minister. This has been a problem that's been on the prime minister's desk for 6 years, not just the defense minister's desk. And the fact that it took 6 years for this to happen, I think, shows some systemic problems in the way that we oversight over the military. We need stronger legislative oversight. We can't just entrust it to the executive.
Althea, what did you make of the move? Very quick off the mark for the minister.
Well, a few things. The letter was written on October 20th. If the rumors that we were all hearing in Ottawa were true, then one suspects that the defense minister at the time, Harjit Sajjan, knew that he was on his way out. So, cabinet shuffle was just a few days later. It would have been in the government's interest to not have him act on that and to leave that for Anita Anand. So I think strategically, it is not that Anita Anand is suddenly more decisive than Harjit Sajjan. Like, we can't say that. If anything, I would say what this whole episode this week is showing us is actually that Louise Arbour is the woman to watch, because this recommendation, Chantal talked about it in the Deschamps report, but was also in the Justice Fish report. Oh, yeah. And when Minister Sajjan got that report earlier, on April 30th, when he responded to it, he ignored that recommendation. They worked on several other recommendations, but this one they did not include. And part of her terms of reference for Madame Arbour are that she is to give a report to the minister monthly about what she's doing. Mm-hmm. In her letter, if you read carefully, she now makes deadlines for the minister. She tells the minister, you must tell me monthly what you are doing on this file. So I think right now it's not so much that it's Anita Anand that we should be watching. Frankly, it's Louise Arbour that we should be watching.
Those are all good points. Chantal, you wanted in there.
Should we need 6 years and 3 former Supreme Court justices to point the way to ministers and to the Prime Minister? I'm struggling with this. I think today's move was a good move, but I don't think it kind of washes away 6 years.
Yeah, I mean Andrew, that's your point, and I must say, for me too. I mean, I've read this recommendation 3 times now, so at some point the government had to move on it. I'm not sure what has changed. Is it the public's willingness to live with this? Is it the sheer volume of complaints there have been? Why is it happening finally?
I think that's part of it, the sheer volume. It reaches a critical mass. Look, there's a reason why militaries have a separate judicial system. There are crimes in the military that don't exist in the civilian power. I understand why there'd be some reluctance to make such a radical move. But at some point, when it's clear that you have institutional and cultural failings on such a scale, I don't think there's any alternative.
Althea, I mean, how many times could the government have ignored this complaint? Were we just not sort of reaching the inevitable, as I think it was Chantal who said?
Well, I think in this case, we actually have to look at what Madame Morbourg is saying in her letter. What she's saying in her letter is that there is a crisis in terms of public perception, but also that the military itself is handicapped by its own rules. If senior leadership cannot know whether or not people are being investigated, they may make, as we have seen, hirings and promotions that are, if they had the full disclosure, they would not be making. And so in their own self-interest, not only in the interest of the victims, in the D&D's own interest, this is a recommendation that needs to be acted. I mean, she's very clear to say that, this is an interim recommendation. It doesn't mean that this will be included in her final report. She may decide to go the other way. We probably all think that she won't, but she's decided that in her investigation at this point, this needs to be done now.
What would the military take? Oh, sorry, Andrew, go ahead. Yep.
I just want to say one other lesson, it seems to me, to the extent that the minister was the issue rather than the prime minister, is I'm not sure it's a great idea to appoint a military person to defense minister. There was a lot of oohing and awing at the time of his appointment, but I think one of the problems that seems to have arisen is he was so steeped in that military culture and in all of the mores and lessons and histories there that perhaps was unable to really stand outside of it.
Yeah, as we were talking about before, it's 6 years to the day when that first cabinet was appointed with Harjit Sajjan, and the language at the time was very different than it is now. Chantal?
It also, the entire issue of dealing with this was not a part of the mandate letter that was given to that defense minister, notwithstanding the fact that the report sat on the prime minister's desk, and the prime minister was going around talking about parity and women's rights and being a feminist prime minister. But I don't think we should blame the fact that Harjit Sajjan was from the military. We have had scores of defense ministers who were not. And by and large, they have allowed the military to do whatever it is that the military does, including this.
I would love to be able to speak French. A lot of my family has a French background. But right now, my priority is ensuring that Air Canada gets back to where they were.
That was Air Canada's CEO, Michael Rousseau, or Rousseau probably as he would say it, answering questions on Wednesday about his lack of French. He's since faced significant political backlash, calls for him to resign even. Today he apologized and committed to improving his French. Chantal, Andrew, and Althea back for another round of this. All right, Chantal, you start us off here. In terms of what we should make of the political response to those kinds of comments.
Well, it's pretty unanimous, and I think it reflects reality. It brings you back 50 years, if you're my age, to a time when bosses spoke English and workers waited for orders, French-speaking workers. This is Air Canada, a company that in my young days used to forbid its French-speaking workers, including pilots, to speak French to each other, and didn't believe it was safe to speak French to land an airplane in Canada or elsewhere in the world where it was common practice. The winners from this round is the CAQ government and its language legislation, which now has more momentum to make Bill 101 tighter. Possibly the federal new Official Languages Act that treats French on a level different from English. Yeah. And the losers, and today they were vocal about being the losers of this, are English Quebecers who are not in any way, shape or form represented by the CEO of Air Canada and it's I don't have time to waste on learning French issue.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Mr. Rousseau didn't suddenly arrive in Montreal and was asked whether he's been living in Montreal. That is where he chooses to live, and I guess chooses to not learn French until today. Andrew, what did you make of the response?
Well, that's part of what's so extraordinary about it. It'd be one thing if he was an American just in from Georgia, hadn't really familiarized himself with the culture of the place. But for a president who's from Canada, of a company of all companies, Air Canada, with its long history in Montreal, it's really quite remarkable and clueless. I mean, I'm not a fan of hearing politicians lecturing private citizens on what language they can speak. But if you are the president of any large corporation, let alone Air Canada, part of your job is to be attuned to local culture, local ideas, local prerogatives, local imperatives. And if you can't figure out in 14 years of living in Quebec that it's going to be important that you at least make the effort to try to learn French. I mean, it's not so much that he didn't learn French, it's that he didn't seem to care about it. And it's not even so much that he didn't care about it, it's that he said he didn't care about it. That's a 3 times level of cluelessness that is really quite remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of surprising, Althea, that someone at that level in the business community living in Quebec would be, I guess, blissfully unaware of how those comments would be received in Quebec.
That to me was the most shocking thing. Like, has he not read any newspaper or turned on the television? Like, these debates are not just happening in the French media. They're also happening in the English media when you're talking about Bill 101 or Bill 96 or the federal government's new language laws. That, to me, the comments about, like, well, isn't it a glorious thing that I've been living in Montreal for 14 years and I haven't had to learn French? Like, that is a testament to the city. This is exactly the problem that we've been talking about for a decade in Montreal. And for him to cast it as in a positive light shows that he's completely oblivious to the discussion and doesn't even realize that he's giving ammunition to a side that doesn't agree with him at all. Like, it's mind-boggling.
Chantal,
And that's the shame in this, is that there's lots of reasonable people who are sympathetic to the cause of French in Quebec, who are very concerned about Bill 96 and who feel it's overkill and indeed dangerous, and they're going to be really put on their back foot by this.
For sure. Chantal, last word.
But he has also hurt Air Canada. It's going to be harder for anyone who lobbies for Air Canada provincially or federally to get to ministers to take a meeting with Air Canada. He's kind of made the company toxic. And that's too bad, because there are lots of good people who work for Air Canada and they deserve better leadership.
Yeah, and lots of people who speak both French and English and other languages too. Okay, thank you all. It was a good round this week. I'll see you next week. Appreciate it.